I think what we're going to do today, we're going to continue in our review. I heard a kind of tail end, I think, Nina, of your thumbs up of the review. So I'm glad to hear that. I did want to bring that up today and ask whether this was painfully slow for some of you or if this was proving to be helpful. But I'm sensing that it's helpful just from the feedback that you've been giving. Either by not giving feedback or by patiently, being there for the process of the review. So I appreciate that. And if there's anything, again, that while we're doing this, that you're saying to yourself, there's stuff in here that I'm still feeling uncomfortable about, or that I still have other questions about, I hope that you continue to feel that this is a good forum and I hate to use the word safe space because we're not doing anything that is unsafe, but that this is a good place for you to be able to voice your questions if and when they come up. And all of the things that come up in the individual chapters will be, it's almost like we're learning little sections of the larger decoding. You know what I mean? In every session, we're learning a little section. If it's today we're working on one specific preposition, or today we're working on one specific grammatical concept, all of that will come into play as we break open prayers, which is the goal of the midway through. Well, I think once we're done with this and we have a very strong understanding of the concepts, we can go into the breakdown. I don't want to jump into that because I feel like that would be a disservice. There's no point in going into the advanced portion if we don't have the baseline. And that's usually my critique of most classes that I've taken, is that I often feel as though the foundations are lacking. And then when you don't have the foundations, it's very difficult to make any progress and to feel like you understand what you're doing. So I'm hoping that, if I could have called this foundational, this particular level, I think that that's really what it is. And if you come into it with previous knowledge of other things, that's only beneficial. If you come into it with knowledge, but you're not really sure about what that knowledge is, that's a little bit less helpful because you're operating on some systems that you might not fully understand. So again, I'm hoping that everything we're doing together is really about creating that foundation for understanding what we're doing. So with that said, we left off on Monday. And every time I say that, I have to look at my calendar to see what class it is we're doing, what day of the week it is. So yes, on Monday, we left off, I believe, at the start of chapter 4 and the review of chapter 4, which is going to take us into the participle, our next this is a big chunk of learning for us. We did do it the first time around, but I think the second time around it might make a little more sense because you already have a preview of what that's going to look like. So let's take a look at that. I'm gonna put up the screen share for the slide. I had a student in my yesterday's class who had questions about the slide. And didn't quite understand what was going on the slide. So I just want to clarify that when I have these slides that I made, so they're not coming from any particular, that was not the right screen share. Hold on, let me try that one more time. Okay, the slides are actually just a consolidation of the information on the page, meaning that what I've got on this is all the information that's happening in chapter 4, and I'm basically making it like giving bullet points so that we're not having to go through the kind of tedium of like every single page. So when it says review chapter 4, page 54, what it means obviously is that page 54 is the reference to the textbook of where I am, and all of the bullet points are the, let's say, 8 or 9 pages of text kind of condensed into one. So that's all that is. It's just a table of contents of chapter 4. So if that was confusing to you, I hope that was clear. If it was clear to you, then I'm sorry that was redundant. All right, so let's take a look at chapter 4. In chapter 4, we have these 2 roots that we briefly looked over, and they should be familiar to you because this, again, is not new information. Asher bachar banu v'natan lanu, right? We've got the chose or select and the give or the grant. The details of that, plus the list of various vocabulary that comes from those 2 roots, can be found on pages 57 and 58, respectively. So you can take a look at some of the words that come from that. There's nothing really, oh, Sue, I have an answer for you. Okay, so I did talk to my father right after class. I find that's the best thing to do. So when there's a question, I call him right away so that I don't forget. And what he told me was the root of nun taf nun. So let me just rephrase the, actually, Sue, do you want to ask the question again, or you're eating breakfast and I can ask the question? Unmute.
No, yeah, I can ask it.
Okay, go for it.
Just that didn't, I'm just finding the page. What page? I'm sorry.
Page 57.
57, yes, it was the, it was the first one on in the list of words, and the nun was dropped from the first nun was dropped. So I just was asking about that.
Right. So the word in script I wrote up here is the word for gift, which is matana. And matana means a present or a gift. And Sue was asking, where did the other nun go? Why is there missing a nun in the root? Because we have here the taf nun, but what's that mem, first of all? Why is that nun of the nun taf nun, why has that been dropped in the word for gift, which is the word matana? So on the bottom of page 57. The answer is the following. There are roots. So is anyone familiar with French, basic French vocabulary of French grammar? Anyone? Okay, if you're not, the gist of what I'm about to say is the following. In French, there are 4 different subsets of verbs, depending on how they end in the infinitive. If a verb ends with er, ir, re, etc., it fits into a certain classification, and then based on that, there's like a certain template that the verb follows. Hebrew, like every other language, has these kind of rules. What it means is that, I think someone's in the weight room. I'm gonna ask Judy to come in early because whenever she arrives, I'm gonna let her know I can't let people in after 9:05. Judy, when you're settled in, if you can get here early next time, that would be great. I appreciate that. Okay, so basically, the verb nun taf nun follows in a collection of verbs that begin with a nun. They're called pei nun verbs. Follow me for just a second, and if this is too complicated, I will drop it. Basically, when you have, in Hebrew, the word for a verb looks like this. Pei, a po'al. So a po'al is a verb. That's the word for verb. When we're looking at roots, each letter in the verb, in the word po'al, and I'm going to get rid of that vav actually because it's in the way of my 3 letters. This represents the template of a root because it has 3 letters. Position 1 is the pei. Position 2 is an aleph. Position 3 is a lamed. Follow me for just a second, and then you can tell me you don't understand what the heck I was talking about, and that's okay. When we're looking to figure out how to operate, how to use a root, it's important to know what letters are in what position. So if I have like a weak letter in any of those positions, then that makes it difficult to conjugate the verb. I have to drop certain things. I have to change vowels, right? When I have an aleph, ayin, hey, yud, or vav, any of those letters that are not strong consonant sounds. In grammar, in Hebrew, you'll hear the term a lamed pei or a lamed hey verb. What that means is that the position in the verb is indicated by the letters pei, aleph, lamed, which mean verb. So if I have a verb that begins with a nun, it's called a pei nun verb. That means the position of the first letter, which is the pei position, is the letter nun. And the problem with the letter nun is that it is a clashing sound with the letter mem. And there are many words that begin with a mem because it's a reflexive, it's an indicator of a reflexive verb. Basically what that means is, usually if I wanted to write the word natan, and I want to say I am giving something, I would write the letter mem in front of it. I would say min naten. And the mem and the nun are clashing sounds. They just are in Hebrew. So every time you have a mem and a nun together, something has to change, either a vowel change or a letter change. So in this case, because the mem and the nun are clashing, in certain word creations, I eliminate the nun. And that goes for any other verbs that have a nun in the first position. That's the long answer to your question. So there are verbs, we haven't really seen many of them yet, which are going to have a weak letter either in the first, second, or third position of the verb. And that is going to change the way we conjugate it. Now, this will lead into what we're doing today because we're looking at the idea of this participle and the participle construction. The participle construction is only going to work with strong roots. And the strong roots are roots that are made of, and Andrea, I'll get your question in a second. The strong roots are made of consonant sounds. So I have b, ch, r. I have n, t, n. These are still strong. These are still called strong roots because they have in them the strong consonant sounds. So when we look at the participle, which we will do momentarily, the rule of the participle construction that I'm going to show you only applies to those roots. Now, from what we've learned so far, we don't really have any exceptions that we have to deal with. If you want to look at the back flap of your books, the back flap of the book indicates the roots that we have done. So if you wanted just a reminder of all of them, they're all in the back. We haven't gotten to the whole part, but if you want to start at the beginning and stop at chapter 4, you can see the roots that we're talking about. All right, Andrea, question.
Yeah, so maybe I'm not following you correctly. I thought you said that when it's a nun and a mem,
Yeah,
sometimes you change it when it's a verb. But
yeah,
in matana, isn't that a noun?
yeah. It's a noun. It is a noun, but it's the same. It's still the same sound problem. It doesn't matter. It doesn't. I mean, you do change it when it's a verb because it's more visible when it's a verb. It's more visible when it's a verb. So you don't think about it actually occurring when it's a noun as well, but it's the same problem.
Okay.
It's the same clash. So a lot of things in Hebrew in terms of vowel nikud, in terms of the choice of certain vowel sounds or the need to switch vowel sounds happens when there is a clash, when there's an audible clash. And oftentimes that's about the consonant sound. So mem nun, as my dad told me, I didn't know this, but that I learned that thanks Sue for teaching me something or for telling me to go to my father to learn something new. The mem nun is, it just doesn't work. So mantana would not, it just does, the mem nun sound clashes, therefore the nun is dropped. That's all I got to say about that without confusing you any further. And if things like that come up again, we can relook at it. You know, we can say like, oh, this is an example of something we talked about November 11th. Not that any of us will remember that we talked about it on November 11th, but maybe now that I said it, we will remember that. Questions about those two roots before we move into the participle? Okay, so we're flipping to page 59. 59 is going to start us off in this chapter of this construction. The construction of this participle is kind of a weird thing. We said that it is a noun and a verb at the same time, and the beginnings of this kind of strange construction comes from the fact that, and I said this already, but I'll say it again, that in the Torah, there is no present tense. And because Hebrew kind of began as a biblical language, a lot of the roots of the way it's kind of the foundations of Hebrew come from its beginning. So the origins of Hebrew being a biblical language first, before it was a modern language, did not allow for a present tense. So the present tense is kind of did someone say this, a gerund? Is that what that is, the ing? Yeah, Ken's nodding. Yeah, Ruth is nodding. Yeah, you're all nodding. So the ing, the guarding, watching, eating, etc., is that form that then was like, oh, this works as a present tense, so we're going to kind of keep it at that. I'm not really sure who was behind that if it was a committee that said, well, let's not mess with it. It makes sense. It works in liturgy. It works in the thought process of the ing being a continuous present tense verb works. Let's keep it at that. Regardless, this idea of the participle started and continued with this form. So this is the slide that we're going to look at because it's a little bit clearer than the book has on page the middle of page 60 that has the 4 forms. Again, I'm reviewing, so at any point if this is unclear or if you guys are like, you've covered this enough, we can move on, you just need to let me know that. So this particular form here is going to help us to translate and to understand text. We're going to look, after we look at the slide, I'm going to take out a text from the Siddur that's going to have a couple of the forms of this ing, or the guard of, or guarding, or keeping. We're going to look at that in practice. But first, I just want to go over the way this works. So the note on the bottom remains, and this is what I said at the very start of the hour. We are dealing here with regular verbs. And in Hebrew, a regular verb is a verb that only has consonant letters. And I know the concept might be a little curious, but just go with it for now. So as our baseline, and we've done this many times, we're going to use the word, we're going to use bocher. We're going to use bocher, to choose, instead of shomer, which is usually the one that they take as the sample. So bocher, and I'm going to give my script bet, my bocher. The other letters are going to be very recognizable. Bocher, choosing. Ata bocher, ani bocher, hu bocher. So these are all of our singular masculine pronouns. And if we need to go over the pronouns again, I'm happy to do that. But I think for now, if I mention these, you'll know what I'm talking about. These are the singular masculine, right, on this side. Yes, everyone's nodding, good. Ani bocher, this is our base. So when we're talking about how do we figure out what the, how does this pattern work, we always look at singular masculine as the base. And I think this goes for a lot of languages as well, that this is kind of like the template. And then we have the endings that go along with the others. So here we have the feminine ending, which is going to be the same idea. I'm entering my root. So fairly straightforward, this template. I have bocher, ani, at, he. Our feminine pronouns are going to be, anyone?
Correct.
Bocheret.
Okay.
Bocheret. Right, so, yeah? Question?
So this is the verb. This is like,
This is the verb, yeah.
this is the verb, not
It
the
is
noun.
it's the verb and the participle at the same time. So
Okay.
so it doesn't necessarily work with the feminine, because we don't really we don't have this form. The feminine form doesn't really appear in the Siddur. It doesn't appear really readily in the Siddur because, well, we're operating on masculine, on gendering in terms of the verbs.
Yeah.
Obviously, but when I'm saying ani ata hu bocher, if I take this back to page 59 with the concept of he is a guard, or he is one who guards. So it's the same. It's exactly the same, except for now our verb, instead of being guarding, is the word choosing. So if I say ata bocher, meaning God, so I'm going to use the ata because that again is the pronoun that's most often associated with God in the Siddur. So if I say ata bocher, or shebachar banu mikol ha'amim. So ata bocher. Bachar is not a good example because it's a past tense, but bocher, you are the chooser of. I mean, the chooser is not really it's not a noun. Like, he is a chooser. It doesn't work the same way as saying he is a guard, but the idea is the same. So yeah.
I'm sorry. So it could mean either he is guarding or he is a guard.
Exactly. That's what right. That's the premise of this participle, which is explained on page 59, that it can take on as a noun and as a verb. Those are the two charts on page 59. So this was like the basics that we've covered before, but we're reviewing again, that it can take on these two different ideas. And again, the origins of that come from the fact that we traditionally don't have a present tense. And that might explain why we don't have a present tense of the word to be. When I say like ani, I say ani mia. I don't say ani blank mia. Like ani mia is just I am. We don't have the verb to be in the present tense. There might be something philosophical about that. There might be something practical about the Torah, the biblical text, the origins of the language is not in a present tense. So the present tense was kind of created out of this participle. I'll send you guys a supplemental text that you can read on your own to kind of understand the origins of this, because I think it might not really, I might not be giving it justice, but the point is I want you just to look at the forms for right now. You know, the origins of it are probably a little bit more esoteric than they are helpful for us right now. But the idea is, you could say, if I take away bocher, for instance, and I put in instead, so I don't want to use shomer because boré. Here, I'll do boré. Boré is to create. We've already seen this. Boré pri hagafen, right? Boré. So boré, here's my aleph, my script aleph. Boré. So ata boré, or boré pri hagafen. Basic. Boré pri hagafen, the creator of the fruit of the vine. Boré pri ha'etz, the creator of the fruit of the tree. So you can use it as, if you translate it, technically it's supposed to be the creator of. And that's not a verb, right? When I say that, that's not a verb. Yeah. But I can also translate it, because this word toggles between noun and verb. I can also say, you who have created the. Because it's in a present tense, it's also strange, right? You who create the, or the creator of, and it's the same. It's used in that same word is used to express those two different ideas of the active present tense and the noun, the creator. And because there isn't the verb, you are the creator, in Hebrew, there isn't the is or are. So when I'm saying it literally, I'm saying boré pri hagafen, creator. There's no verb in here in Hebrew, right? Boré pri hagafen, creator of the fruit of the vine. In English, I would have to say, you are the creator of the fruit of the vine, to give a verb to the sentence, correct? Is that correct? In English, I would need that. In Hebrew, I don't need to have the verb you are or he is, because the verb in the present tense doesn't exist in Hebrew. I don't have that.
Can I ask a question?
Sherry, then Adria, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so if it weren't God, you say, you are creating. Okay, You're creating, that's the gerund, that's present tense.
Correct.
But when I was struck when you said have created, because that is not present tense. That's something past tense, and it's escaping me. Ken, maybe you know, or I would know. That is a verb. Have created. Did create. You created, or you have created. And I can't remember what have when you put the have, but that's not
perfect.
Oh yes, past perfect. Thank you. So how does that figure in? Because that's not what we've been discussing.
Well, I think it's this idea of the continuous. It's this idea of God when we're talking about liturgical Hebrew and this that even in biblical Hebrew, when we look at the verb structure of Torah text and of liturgy, there's something, it crosses over into this conceptual threshold, if I can say it like that. Because Sherry, we're not dealing with like an actual sentence where I say, Bob walked to the store and there he sees, well, that doesn't really work, but we can't, the grammar of Torah and the grammar subsequently of liturgy has a certain amorphous time, a time sense. Like when I'm blessing something, if you think conceptually, if I'm saying, Baruch atah melech haolam boré pri hagafen. So I'm saying, God, you are the creator of, but the idea is like you create and continue to create. The present continuous, or the past, present, future continuous. When we talk about God, and I think that's why looking at grammar in liturgy is difficult, because we're not talking about just that God created the fruit of the vine. God continues to create the fruit of the vine. So the concept of this present tense and the gerund of the continuation of it is kind of, it's a little bit murky. It doesn't have, I didn't mean to confuse you by saying that, but I think that the concept of it is that we're looking at prayer as being something beyond a present beyond a present tense, because it's a present continuous.
Yeah.
Which is why we say the creator of and not creating or created.
Okay, that's not confusing. It's actually expansive because, when you're diagramming a sentence and you have the space for your verb, because it's God, it can be past perfect. It can be, you can conjugate it any way you want, because that's wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I don't know that I meant for that to happen, but I mean, if it helps to
Thank you.
understand it.
It was sort of profound in a way. The theological aspects of grammar.
And that-
and,
and that's-
and
that's
Hebrew's weird like that, because it doesn't, it didn't begin as being a language of functionality. It didn't begin as being like, we're going to use this language to express our thoughts about living life in a present tense, or even being active, using the language in an active way. I mean, think about the history of the language. It was always a text-based, you're reading Torah. That's how it started. And it was never spoken. So then when it was like, how do we create this, take this language and move it into a present tense? That's kind of the fine line between this idea of this participle and speaking now of like, I am living in a present tense, and why there's such a weird wiggly line between those two concepts, which if you understand that, and even if you don't get it, but you understand that it's not as clear cut as a regular modern, or not even modern, a classic language would be, that is a level that I think is really profound about Hebrew. So I'm glad that you got something out of that. And I don't, I don't mind talking about it either, and having some other ideas. I know Adria had a question. I don't want to forget to.
No, it's not really a question. This is going to sound really silly, I think, but when you're using this kind of construct or construction to extol and to praise in a way, but for a unique entity, and not amongst maybe the general public, it's language. I mean everybody can laugh, but I was sitting here thinking of the Wizard of Oz, and when the wizard is behind the curtain about to be revealed, he speaks of himself exactly in this language, in these terms, without the verb, the way you were describing. And often we still do this to some extent when there's high praise. Oh, you who, it's very stilted, and it's very Hollywood, but I'm trying to look up who wrote The Wizard of Oz to see. I can't remember.
L. Frank Baum, right? Is that?
Yeah. So or the script, just because
I'm sure it was taken.
Often,
I mean, if you look at the book, I mean, there was some kind of fundamental religious aspect to. I mean, obviously, I think a lot of those old stories do have some, a deeper level of that. I don't think it's fun. I mean, I think it's very profound. Again, I think all of these ideas about the way we look at words, language, and prayer are very personal, but they're also, they've been around for thousands of years. So there is something very human about the way we interact with language and the unknown, or language and spirituality. And sometimes we don't stop to think about what are the words we use, aside from saying, male, female, the ideas of our modern issues that we have, the more profound ideas of, the unknown, and how do we address that, or how do we deal with something in terms of tenses. Before Judy had her hand up, and then I'll get to everyone else. I want to make sure that I get everyone who. Judy, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, actually 2 questions. There must have been a lot of pushback, people amongst the Orthodox at least, that to make this an everyday language.
It was.
Yeah. Okay. And the question I have is bochar. Could that be in the noun form? Could it be a choice?
In the noun form, you would take the root. Interesting. So we're talking about election, right? Or choosing. So in the noun form, the word for choice would be bechira. Bechira is a choice. And I would say an election too is a bechira, is an election. Let me see if they have that word in here.
It's
Yeah.
on page 58.
Yeah, it's in there. It's the third word. So when we're looking at the verb construct, it's more often than not when it's oe in like omer, bocher, molech, shomer, it's usually the form of the verb or the participle, depending on what text you're reading it in. If you're reading it in a siddur, in a prayer book, it's often that form of he who does X. So he who creates, he who chooses, or the chooser, the creator. When we're going to look at that in a couple of seconds, actually. So the noun form of that isn't necessarily, Judy, you would use it in a different, you'd construct it slightly differently. So you can look at page 58 to just, if you have, do you have the book?
Yes.
Judy, do you have the book? Okay. So if you look at page 58, it'll give you kind of the more of the constructions of how to use that root to create nouns. And let me just say as an aside, not every single word in Hebrew comes from a root. So I know a lot of times like my students will be like, what's the root of this? And the answer is there is no root for it. It's just a word. And that's okay too. So, but more times than not, you can trace back a word to figure out where it comes from. And oftentimes, of course, in Hebrew, there are words that come from other languages that don't, that don't resonate in terms of roots. Stephen, you had your hand up to ask something or to make a comment.
No, I was just going to add in my own philosophical comment about spiritual language, and
Sure.
the time went by, but we're talking about a spiritual language, and there's in the spiritual world, I mean, our ancestors are standing here right next to us. So there's like no time frame. At least that's how I understand it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that's why, when you think about languages that have very complex grammar forms that take on the, something that happened, it hasn't happened yet, or, something that has happened and will happen again. The concepts kind of are able to express a presence or a lack of presence or a want of presence. And sometimes a simplification of present, past, future doesn't do that justice.
It's the dream world. And I think our unconscious minds understand that a lot better without boundaries that we have to put on. Like the year ends today and we start a new year, but really, it's a continuum. Anyway.
No, thank you for that. I mean, this is all very helpful. And because we're learning this in terms of liturgy, it does change the concept of the way these sentences are constructed. So I'm gonna take this slide away for a second to bring us to an example of this participle, because I don't want us to get to 950 and not have looked at it. And we'll come back to this again. So the slide is not going far away. It's just going to be moved for a second. And I'm going to take us into this. Let me move your heads out of the way. I like your heads, but I'm going to move them out of the way for a second and clear the screen. Okay, so here we have something that is called, this is a prayer that is, again, back to the Birkot HaShachar, the prayers of the early morning service. And this is the list of prayers, and you might be familiar with this, that kind of brings us into the start of the day. And it goes through a list of blessings. We'll look at the Hebrew, and then I'll flip to the English side so you can actually see what the translation of this Siddur is. This is the Sim Shalom. Did I send you all a link to this on Monday, in Monday's email, to the Sim Shalom PDF?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So you're more than welcome to mark the page on this if you want to look at this on your own. It's available in every Siddur. So that's a great thing about learning a prayer book and kind of the order of the prayers is that every Siddur, regardless of, whether it's Reconstructionist, conservative, or Orthodox, will have the same order of the prayers in the same order, which is, once you get used to it, you can just flip to where it is, where you're going to find it in a book. So these begin, and when I was in elementary school, this is how we started most of our morning services, with this list of prayers. And they're obviously, over time, some of them have been adapted and changed, and some of them remain the same. So curious whether we want to, let's see if anyone is interested, since we have, this is also a good time to practice. I'm going to ask if anyone wants to read the first prayer, which is and they're all going to start pretty much the same. The only difference is really at the end. So this shouldn't be too difficult a task. Sherry, do you want to start us off since you had your hand up first?
I'm really quick, aren't I?
Yeah, you're so fast. I appreciate it. It's very, you get the job done. Go for it.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech ha'olam, asher notan Chavi.
Yeah, so try that word again. So you're going to blend. So you're going to get la, and then you're going to blend these two sounds together. So la,
Las
sech. So you have a vowel under that sin. So it's an
Las
S.
Chavi.
La sech vi, exactly. So sech is one, it's a hard one. Sech vi. Good. La sech vi.
Bina.
Yep.
Lich. I'm sorry, I raised my
Did
hand.
you regret this one? Same thing
Licha.
again. So le, first is the shva with a vocalized shva. This one is blended. So I'm going to do le, blend these two letters together. Ha.
Lichach.
This is the vet. Lehav.
Lehav.
And then this is the
Chin.
next. That's it. Lehavchin. Good.
Ben.
Good.
Yom. U. Ben. Laila.
That's it. Fantastic. Fantastic. This is a beautiful blessing, basically saying, blessed are you, God, who has allowed our brain or our minds to be able to distinguish between the day and the night. So allowing for us to wake up in the morning and say, this is a new day.
I have to work on my blending.
Well, the Shiva is very helpful. If you remember that it creates a syllable. So you'll do the la and then sech vi. And this one is le havchin. So that Shiva creates that blended syllable sound, if you remember from, I don't know if most of you were not in my Aleph classes ever, but that's the way I teach the Shiva. It's basically to create a blend, and it makes it easier to read it that way. But you did a great job. It was a hard one. So what's the verb in this one? The verb in this one, if anyone can detect it, is not in our participle example. So this is not a participle example of a verb, but where is our verb? Just out of curiosity.
Asher natan la.
That's it. Yes, and then lehavchin is an infinitive, but basically natan, asher natan. So natan, we have that in our verbs in our chart, right? To give. Asher, who has given. Natan is in a past tense, so which is why it doesn't fit into the noten. It doesn't fit into that same structure. This is a past tense. Who has given. Okay, let's take a look at the next few, because I'm waiting to get to the part where I have our participle, which is going to be coming up. Who wants to read the next one? Any hands? Ruth. All right, Ruth hand. Ruth, Stephen, and Rafaela. All right, go ahead, Ruth.
Okay, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani b'tzalmo.
Exactly, she'asani b'tzalmo. This is an interesting one too. Asani. Asani is a combination of the verb to make or to do, to make, asa, and ani. It's a combination of asani. We're going to get back to that when we look at that pronominal ending. She'asani b'tzalmo, who has made me. B'tselem Elohim. This is one of those words that we might recognize, right? B'tselem, in the reflection of, or in the image of you, of b'tzalmo, of him, that pronominal ending of his, in his image. So again, breaking up the Hebrew, who has made me in his image. In English has many, many words. In Hebrew, 2 words, she'asani b'tzalmo. And those 2 words encompass that entire phrase of who has made me in his image. Some of these are interesting because if we look at if we do this text with a comparison between an Orthodox Siddur and a Reconstructionist conservative Siddur, we're going to find some differences in the way in which these blessings are expressed in the Hebrew. Next I have in line, I've got Stephen for the next one.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'asani Yisrael.
Yes. So you could figure out what that is based on she'asani, which we looked at in the prior blessing, she'asani Yisrael. This is a contentious one for some Siddurim. I guess the Sim Shalom doesn't have a problem with it. What do you think that means, Stephen?
Blessed are you, God, who have, she'asani.
She'asani was the same one we
Has
saw
given us
here.
Israel. Has given us Israel.
She'asa. So we said asa comes from the root word of to make, right?
Make.
We're going to look at this in a few chapters. It's coming up soon. Asa. Ose shalom. You know this one. Ose shalom, to make. She'asani, who has made me. Same word, She'asani Yisrael. So when we look at Yisrael, we're not looking at the land, we're looking at people.
I see.
Yeah. She'asani, who has made me an Israel, who has made me a Jew, basically. Which is again contentious for some to use that. Other people will say She'asani. What is the oh shoot, I'm gonna find it for you guys. The exception of that. Say that again.
Adam, person?
Yeah, She'asani Adam, She'asani. Yeah, that could be the one that they use. Rafaela, I have you next. You've got to unmute yourself, my dear. It's okay. You're good.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam sha'asani ben bat horim.
Yeah, okay. All right. So we might know this.
Horim.
Yeah, bat chorin. So we might know this from Passover. From the song in Passover that says, Avadim hayinu, Ata b'nei chorin. What is chorin? B'nei chorin. B'nei chorin means free people. So in this one here, we have the same asani from asa plus ani, as I've indicated up here, She'asani, who has made me, ben or bat chorin. So here's our egalitarian version, right? Because ani can take on, when I say asani, that's genderless.
Yeah.
We know that ani can be both masculine, feminine, right?
They're going to text us as they bike by.
So when we get to asani, asa-ani, who has made me ben chorin or bat chorin, depending on whether you identify with masculine or feminine pronouns, a free person, like bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah. Bar and ben are the same, basically, a son of. All right, I got Sue next for the next one.
Yes.
This is going to be our participle finally, but go ahead.
Uh-oh. Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. I don't act. Is it po?
Yes.
Pokeach.
That's it. That's it.
Pokeach.
Blend.
Ivrim.
That's it. Ivrim. So Sherry, that's the word again. So we have an E and a Vav blended. Iv, syllable one, reem, syllable two. Ivrim. Pokeach ivrim. So pokeach, this is here. This is our participle. Now it's a verb that is a little unusual. It's unusual because it ends with a vowel sound, and that is due to the root of the chet. Don't ask about it now. We don't have to deal with it. But pokeach means to open, to pokeach. Now the translation for this one, I'm going to flip us to the English for just a second so that you can see what the translation is for this. I'm going to flip us to the English side. Oops, the English side is a little bit less wide than the Hebrew side. So we're going to pokeach ivrim, which is this one here. So look at that. Giving sight, pokeach. So look at the way that they translate that in the English. I mean, I don't know how else you would say it. You know, the verb of like to give sight to. Give sight to the blind. So the word ivrim, Allison, I'll get to you in just a second. Ivrim is blind. And so when we've got pokeach ivrim, the translation to that is kind of this gerund, the giving sight. You see that? That's our participle. So let's flip back to the Hebrew for a second. If I
They
can.
do that with the other ones too.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we haven't, let's see. Oh no, let me get back to my Siddur. I think I lost it. Oh shoot, hold on. I'm gonna get it back. I'm gonna get it back. And I'm gonna remember what the page was. And I think it was page 65, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you. I pushed the back arrow and it took me back. Here we go, page 65. That's not the right page. Sorry guys, technical
Or
issues.
it could be who gives sight to the blind, right?
It could be, but in this case, because that's the thing. So it's this weird thing of the difference between almost there, the PDF and the pages don't line up, which is why I put 65 into the thing and it did not give me page 65. All right, one more. Okay, so here, Pokeach ivrim literally means he who gives sight to, or the sight giver. Pokeach opens up the eyes of. Now we can translate that, as the verb, or we can translate that as this gerund, this ing, and that's where the weird bit comes in with this translation. Allison, question, or did you want to read the next thing?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Where it says Ivrim, that's not related to Ivrit, right? It's a different.
No, it's not, because Ivrit, who could tell me what the difference is with that?
Is that with an olive?
So close. Ivrit, as in Hebrew, I don't want to write on the prayer. I feel Ivrit is Ein Vet Resh Yud Taf. That's Ivrit. This is an Ein. Yeah, so it's a vet, not a vav. So Iver, again, so this is another reason why spelling is important in Hebrew, because you can go from the difference between a blind person and a Hebrew. Like an Ivri, when I talk about a Hebrew, as in a Hebrew person, not a Hebrew language, a Hebrew, that would be the word Ivri, but it's spelled with a vet and not a vav. The Ivri with the vav is a blind person. All right, let's keep going. So if we look at these, so we have Pokeach Ivrim. The next one also, this is an interesting one too, and I'm going to tell you why this doesn't fit into our pattern either. Who can read me this next one over here?
I'll do it.
Go for it.
Me? Allison?
Well, whoever just
Okay.
said I'll do it. I didn't see a face, but I heard a voice.
That was Allison.
Allison, all right, great. Go for it, Allison.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumim.
Exactly. Now, this is a very interesting verb right here, malbish. So if I wanted to give you the root of this one is lamed bet ta, shin. Lamed bet shin is my root. And if I look at this, this might be a little confusing, but I'm going to say it anyway. The verb would be lovesh, to wear. So I could say ani. Ooh, that was a very thick line. Sorry about that. Lovesh lamed vet shin. Again, I'm sorry for writing on top of this, but I don't have any other. Wait, let's see if I have any more room to do this. I don't want to write on this prayer. I don't like that. All right, malbish, the verb, the active verb would be lovesh, to wear, but I'm not saying to wear, I'm saying to clothe. So when I'm giving a verb in Hebrew, which is not an active verb, but rather, and one of you grammar people are going to tell me what the term is for this, but I am performing this verb on something else. What is that? How does that work in my grammar? Anyone know?
Repeat that. I'm performing what?
I'm performing the verb on someone else. So I'm not doing it to myself, I'm doing it to someone else. For instance, I'm clothing, or I am teaching, or maybe that doesn't exist in English.
The active form instead of the passive form?
The active versus the passive. The active would be to wear. The passive would be to dress. You might be right about the active passive, but I'm not. In Hebrew, it's a very common thing to have a verb. To have a verb that on the one hand is I do on my own, and the other is that I do it to someone else or something else. So
It's completed by an indirect object.
Maybe that's
to
it.
something rather than I'm doing X, you're doing it to somebody. That's an indirect object. So maybe that qualifies the verb.
Yes, I think
Anybody
that's
else
right. Maybe it's actually who it is that is being done to rather than the actor of it. Anyway, my point is that malbish means to dress, but the verb is lovesh. So I could say, if I wanted to use the participle again, I can use that same verb, lovesh. I'm so sorry about the crookedness of these letters, but that's my oe, that's my participle form, lovesh. But this verb does not mean to dress, like to get dressed, but it means to dress those who are naked. And that's why the form is a little bit different. There's a bunch of words like verbs like that. I'm excited to teach them to you too, because again, conceptually, they're really interesting to think about active and passive, or anyway, we'll get to that. Oh my goodness, we have come to the end of our session. But here, I just want to show you this one here. Zokef was one I was looking at. Ozer, otif, and noten. These verbs here are also zokef kifufin, someone who is unbending those who are bent, basically saying like straightening those who are bent, or helping Israel with the helper of. So the way that they're translated, if I just flip to the English really quickly, and then I'm going to let you go. If we look at the English very quickly, you could see that this here says raising, creating, providing, guiding, clothing. They all have the ing. All of them have the ing, but if we think about the concept of them, these verbs are also active. So they're active verbs in one way, and then they're this gerund on the other side of it. Very strange concept, to be continued. We're not going to be done with this because I realize it's very deep and there's a lot going on there. If you want to do some research on your own in the meantime and do some wiki searches or some text searches on this idea of the participle, the present tense, and then this gerund, this weird combination, I have some stuff that I'll send you as well. But let's do some research on it because I think it's a really interesting topic for us to take a look at. Thank you. Stephen, quick question before we go, or was that a wave goodbye?
Can I ask a question about Ivrim? What's the plural of Hebrews?
Ivrim. Ivrim. Yeah, Ivri is the singular. Ivrim is the plural of, well, the plural of the people, right? The Hebrews. Ivrim. Yeah, Ivrim.
That's a lot clear. I thought Ivrim meant something else.
No, Ivrim means Ivrim are the blind, but Ivrim are the Hebrew, depending on the Vav or the Vet, depending on how you spell it. I know you guys have a Psalms class to go to, so I don't want to keep you any longer than I have to. Stephen, if you want to continue this, I'm going to stay on. So if you guys have to go, you can go. I'm going to stay on the screen if you want to chat a little longer. I don't have anywhere to be until 11. So
I got a quick question.
Yeah, George.
You said earlier that this wasn't a spoken language. What language did they speak?
Well, Aramaic. They spoke Aramaic for the most part, especially in the diaspora. So I guess depending on where, how early the Hebrews lived, they usually spoke the language of the land. So when they were in Babylonia, they spoke Aramaic, and then Hebrew only began as an actual language in not even medieval times. It was still a written language. So there was poetry, there was song, liturgy. Most of the Siddur, most of the prayer book language was created in the Middle Ages, and it only became a spoken modern language, officially in the 19th century. Look up Eliezer ben Yehuda. Eliezer ben Yehuda, he basically was the kind of the guy who was like, we gotta take this language. We have to create something that all Jews everywhere in the world will have in common, and that's the beginnings of modern Hebrew. Yeah, a really interesting stories. I'm happy to send you, George, if you can't find anything. There's plenty online, but I'm happy to send you anything if you're curious.
Oh, thank you. I would appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd love to. Any other questions while we're still
This is
hanging
just
out?
the point. The Kabbalah Center uses the translation, "Blessed are you, our God, ruler of the world, who clothes the naked."
Ah, interesting.
Clothes, and they do it with all of them. Who gives strength to the weary.
Oh, interesting. So but they added a verb to it then. I mean, who gives? I guess there's no other way around it. Yeah. Interesting, and it'll be interesting to see how different Siddurim or different kind of texts translate that.
Who strengthens those who are bent over.
Versus the strengthener or the strength, who strengthens the people. Let me see what the Siddur says about the strengthening of the bend over. Raising, creating, providing, guiding, giving sight to. It's hard. I mean, Hebrew is interesting because there's a lot of words that are kind of in translation, they're a little lost. And I guess that goes for any language in translation, right? You lose quite a bit of it when you're the subtlety, the nuance of it when you're looking for a translation.
Even English to English.
Yeah, definitely. Even English to English. That's a good point. That's a really good point. Thank you guys. And anything else you want to send me via email, I'm happy to bring up to class. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you guys next Monday. Shalom lehitraot.
Thank you, Mia. Bye-bye.
My pleasure. Good to see you.